Hello! Hello, everyone, and welcome to Women and Children First Virtual. I'm Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First Bookstore. We're one of the last feminist bookstores in the United States, and we're so excited for tonight's anthology reading in honor of Fury, Women's Lived Experiences During the Trump Era. Tonight's readers include Roost, Cassandra Lane, Dina Elenbogen, Suzanne Clores, and Sarah Einstein. Now we begin our virtual events as we begin all of our events that are typically held here in the store with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied unceded territory of the Peoria, the Potawatomi, the Miami, and the Sioux people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event at native-land.ca. Thank you all so much. And thank you all so much for being here. Women and Children First in Chicago is now partially open for business, but we are always open online. Our web store is open 24/7, but we do plan to continue to host all of our events virtually until the end of 2020. Now, a few housekeeping notes before we get started. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a very handy ask a question box right there. And you'll also see a really great button that says buy the book. And that button leads you to Women and Children First, where you can buy tonight's featured title, Fury, or any other book on your wish list. We also we have a lot more events coming up this month. So if you are interested, please check out our events calendar. At the end of the month, we'll be hosting Lindy West in conversation with Samantha Irby. All right, so on to tonight's event. After watching Tuesday night's vice presidential debate, I think we're all still running on some furious fumes. So this anthology, Fury, brings together a diverse community of women who reveal the impact that Donald Trump's infuriating behavior once the presidency has had on each of them and on all of us. It's a cathartic and communal scream, but it doesn't end in rage. Instead, it goes forward into how these women are harnessing their anger and moving it forward into what they did and are doing with that anger. So I'm honored tonight to introduce the co-editor of this anthology, Roost. Amy is the co-editor of Fury, Women's Lived Experiences During the Trump Era, and also Heroics, Women's Lived Experiences During the Coronavirus Pandemic. Very timely. Amy is also the host of Hazard, a true crime environmental justice podcast that's due to be released soon, and a 2019 Annenberg, California journalism fellow. Amy is originally from Deerfield, and we're so excited to have her here with us tonight. So without further ado, please welcome Amy Roost.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And this is just a huge honor. We were just talking in the green room. There are green rooms in virtual events that, this is of all the bookstores across the country. There's usually one or two that you dream of presenting at some point in your career if you're a writer. And Women and Children First is definitely just the top of my list. So as a Chicagoland native and a feminist, I'm just thrilled to be here, if only virtually. And I hope to be there live in person next year when we start touring with the follow-up to Fury, Heroics. I want to start by talking a little bit about how this book came to be. I read something early this morning in one of my many, what do they call it, doom scrolling on Twitter. My 3 times a night doom scrolling that really kind of captures why I chose to put this collection of essays together. And the original title for this book was We, as in women, we knew. And you'll hear that theme throughout this evening with a couple of our authors. But women, many women, of not 53% of white women, but many women did know that Donald Trump was toxic. And so I saw this tweet this morning, and it really captured and resonated with me, captured what the book's about. Everything mental health care professionals foretold 5 years ago has been true and has come true regarding Donald Trump's conscienceless, exploitive psychopathology. He is a narcissistic psychopath. Damage, destruction, and death without conscience, empathy, guilt, or remorse. And I remember when I decided I needed to put this book together, because it was definitely a need more than a want. Some people didn't understand, what it was I was feeling and why I was feeling compelled. And they were still in that, let's give him a chance, let's see what he's got mode. And I was never in that mode, not before, not after. And I was also going through some personal things, which I'll get to here in a minute, that were pretty significant. And so I had a lot on my plate when the election came around, and just really started losing it after the election. And I remember asking my husband one night how his day went. He's a clinical psychologist, and he told me that just about every single patient he had seen that day, only wanted to talk about the election, and that people were really, really traumatized. And I thought, oh, I'm not the only one. I just kind of felt like I was the only one there for a while, especially given the other things that I was going through. I thought maybe it was just me, And then I asked around, and sure enough, there were a lot of other people, women especially, who felt the way I did. And I thought it would be good to build a community of women, so we could all support each other, and also so that we didn't feel so alone in our emotion and, in some cases, trauma. And so that's what I set out to do. And I just want to thank Pack Press, which is an imprint of Regal House Publishing, which is an all-woman run, woman-owned, independent publisher out of North Carolina, for seeing the potential in the book, and for understanding what it was that I was trying to put across. Mostly, I wanted to talk about, I'll read you the last paragraph of the prologue. My second purpose for putting together the book was to create a record for posterity. Decades from now, much will have been written and documented about Donald Trump's presidency. Just as the news media should not focus excessive attention on a deranged assailant after a mass shooting, neither should any future generation focus all its attention on the deranged person currently occupying the Oval Office. Instead, let this collection of authentic voices stand as a monument to those who suffered and coped, persevered and overcame, and marched and fought for justice during the Trump era. If this book is ignored today, but read in even one classroom 100 years from now, it would make every sacrifice you read about in this collection worthwhile. And so the book, I'm going to read a short excerpt from my essay, but just to let you know, the book is broken into 6 or 7 sections, starting with our bodies, which is several essays about a woman's reproductive rights and just our bodies in general. And ourselves is the second section. A lot of those essays deal with some aspect of trauma. Our families, and we have fortunate to have two authors who wrote essays for that section with us tonight. Our people, which is about is a section where people from typically marginalized communities have written essays, although I will add that there are people from marginalized communities who have contributed throughout, but this is our people, the section is focused more on their religion or their ethnicity, their identity, as opposed to some of the other essays that were written by people of color and LGBTQ community, disabled community, etc. Our work, and a lot of those our contributors were psychologists, but we also have a headmaster from a school, and then our perseverance, which was a section that we included where, you know, people have been fighting the good fight for a long time. And most of those essays are written by feminists who are still fighting the good fight. So I will read a brief excerpt. My essay is called New Normal. And to give you a little bit of background, I have a 26-year-old son who was 22 at the time of the election, and he had just been released after spending 2 months in an ICU, having had a couple of strokes and a few brain surgeries. And he was coming home to live with my husband and me because he needed to go to rehab, brain rehab. And so he's my youngest son. His name's Spencer. And my oldest son is Stuart. He also factors in. My husband's name is Ain. And so he had just come to live with us on October 31st. And the essay toggles back and forth between Donald Trump and what I'm going through in my personal life. Starting with starting with November 9th, 2016, the day after the election. For the second time in 10 days, I am faced with a new normal. Donald Trump is the president-elect. While waiting for coffee to brew, I glance at Facebook on my phone. The first thing I see are celebratory remarks about Trump's victory from a Christian fundamentalist high school friend who rarely posts to social media. Each post ends with the words, "Praise be to God," as if God somehow ordained the election results. I unfriend her. Next, I come across a comment by a friend of my stepson's, a white male millennial. It reads, "Apparently, lots of women like to have their pussies grabbed." I respond, "Dear white men, seriously, for just one day, shut the fuck up. Take some time to reflect, bros, and have a good, long look in the mirror. What have you done in your life to set women back or kept them from rising up? Have you too stereotyped women in your lifetime? Have you consciously or unconsciously objectified women and contributed to voters having such a low regard for women that they would elect a race-baiting, misogynistic liar to be president?" Later in the morning, Stuart texts me a photo of his college library where overnight someone spray-painted swastikas on the bathroom walls. I can't take it. I also can't look away. November 10th, 2016. I listened to Trump's press conference on my way home from dropping Spencer at rehab. He mentions that he's considering keeping two provisions of the Affordable Care Act: the prohibition against insurers denying coverage because of a patient's pre-existing condition, a provision both Stuart and Spencer will depend upon their entire lives, and the one that allows parents to keep their children on their insurance plan until they turn 26, which currently applies to both my sons. Hearing that Trump will preserve the key components of Obamacare is a massive relief until a commentator points out that Trump's plan will never work. Without a mandate for everyone to purchase health insurance, the pre-existing condition provision would send insurance companies into a death roll. I've gone through life blithely assuming I could handle anything thrown my way. Now that I'm forced to prove it, I'm not sure I can. My my reserves are all used up. I want someone to hug me, hold my hand, leave flowers on my doorstep, bring me a hot roast beef sandwich with extra cheese, or simply text me a funny cat video. I've suffered a crack or two or three, and I'm afraid I won't be able to hold myself together much longer. Spencer, who knows nothing of my gossamer thin nerves, arrives home depressed. Who can blame him? One day, he's working his way towards a college degree in engineering, mountain biking and snowboarding on the weekends. And the next day, he's using a walker and can't find his way to take out the trash. I suggest we go to the beach and let nature work its magic. As we amble north along the shoreline, mist settles on our matching curls, salt rims our lips, and the rhythm of the waves steadies our breathing. When the stars come out, we turn back for home, ready to once again face reality. A dear friend calls to check up on me. I confide, I'm barely hanging on. She, a recovering alcoholic, offers me some ironic and excellent advice. It's okay for you to have a glass of wine. Spencer would want you to. I cuddle with Ain, apologize for my recent testiness and for having triaged his needs into obscurity these past several months. He takes my hand, kisses it, and forgives me. I pour that glass of wine and savor it in small sips. Dinner consists of a warm baguette with a wedge of brie cheese. I read for a while, a quiet novel by Wendell Berry, and then head to bed early because I'm tired and because there is nothing noble or pretty about an exhausted martyr. So that gives you a little flavor of the book. And now for some added spice, I'd like to introduce another one of our contributors, Cassandra Lane. Cassandra is the author of We Are Bridges, which comes out next year from Feminist Press. She's the winner of the 2020 Louise Meriwether First Book Prize, and she's the managing editor of LA Parent Magazine in Los Angeles. And Cassandra and I are getting to meet for the first time tonight, even though we live so close by. I live in San Diego. So hi, Cassandra. And I have a quick question for you. I loved your essay so much, and I so want to meet your son someday. He sounds delightful. And I'm curious how you came up with the metaphor of sight.
You know, I was thinking about, at the time, my son had been through several bullying instances, or just kids teasing him about toe walking and stuttering. And there was one more thing that we were adding, which were glasses. And he saw that as just one more thing that kids would have to pick on him for. And I thought about my own. I'm very, very nearsighted. And I remember my first pair of glasses and how I didn't want to wear them. And I was just thinking about the people who were voting for Trump or planning to vote for Trump. And I just started equating that with, like, what are they seeing or that I'm not seeing, or what am I seeing that they're not seeing? And just started thinking about perspective and how it can be very hurtful and painful, and just kind of started writing from there, dealing with that very personal story and looking out.
Thank you.
And your essay is so powerful to me, and I loved hearing you read it and finally getting to meet you on screen live. Thank you so much, Amy and Alyssa, for this book and all of the writers. This is such a powerful book. I'm so honored to be a part of it. Thank you so much to Women and Children First, and Sarah, and to all of the attendees. I'm going to just jump right in the middle and skip around a little bit in the interest of time. The name of the essay is Children Question the Bully's Right to the Presidential Seat. My son Solomon, who is a fourth grader, inherited my nearsightedness. Solomon is also a toe walker, and he stutters. When he was in preschool, my husband and I detected early signs of disfluency and enrolled him in a speech therapy class where his jumbled sounds receded like a tumultuous wave that had washed ashore and folded back into the ocean, replaced by a calm ebb and flow. But by third grade, the impediment had reinserted itself with tidal force. And he gets hung up on words. That, mommy. I have wanted to blame someone, something, anything. When he is mocked at school, I always ask him, how did you respond? I didn't say anything, he says way too often. Why not, I ask. You have the words. You have the power to explain why you need glasses or why you stutter. We've watched the videos together. We've read the articles. Why do you stay silent? Don't be afraid, Saul, I tell him. You have a responsibility to speak up for yourself, to teach others. And if they keep bothering you, use your power voice to shut them down. I raise my voice to a bellow. Let me hear your power voice. During the presidential campaign, Solomon was transfixed by the man who takes bullying, including cyberbullying, to new heights. He watched, his mouth agape, as Trump made fun of a person with a disability, mocked Hillary Clinton's stumble when she had pneumonia, verbally assaulted and demeaned women, made disparaging remarks about Blacks and so-called inner cities, incited the physical assaults taking place at his rallies, and celebrated a virulently racist America. On election night, Solomon's homework assignment was to watch the results, but ultimately his body gave way and he fell asleep, like millions of children across this country. Just before succumbing to his dream state, though, he saw the numbers. He saw that Trump was leading the Electoral College, and he tried his hardest to differentiate each state's popular vote numbers from the overall national ones. He went to bed confident that Trump would not win, because in the stories, the bully always loses in the end. The next morning, Marcus and I tried to normalize breakfast, oatmeal with cream and butter, toast, tea. Marcus turned on the TV, but placed it on mute. Solomon kept asking us, how could someone like Trump get elected to be president? The bully as president of the United States of America. For generations, little boys and girls have considered this seat the ultimate dream job in our nation of dreamers and achievers. They revere it, they aspire to it, and so, for the life of him, Saul cannot make sense of how someone who shows such blatant disdain for others could be his president. Because Trump used his own version of a power voice, I tell him. As crude and uncouth as he is, the guy knows something about the power of language, and he used it as a weapon to dredge up some of our countrymen's fears, resentments, hatred, and ancestral sense of entitlement. This kind of power without purity of vision is dangerous. We may not be able to see well outwardly, but I try to teach Solomon to rely on his inner vision to guide him through the world. I urge him to see people, for better or worse, for who they are inside, their dreams and shortcomings, their character traits and untapped capabilities. Trump cannot clearly see that which is not him, that which is not his own reflection, his own family, his own money and friends and power. Trump towers. There, he has named it. He has no foresight into the future beyond protecting his own kingdom, his own ego, and so he is free, he thinks he is free, to say and do anything to those who appear fuzzy to him, those he does not understand or care to understand, those who do not serve his purpose, his vision of almighty power, an insatiable black hole incapable of ever being filled. As a private citizen, that was his prerogative to some degree. As the highest public servant in the land, his ineptitude at seeing and therefore respecting all of America should be deemed as serious as it is for me to drive without some form of corrective lenses illegal. Thank you.
There, I thank you, Cassandra. That was just so powerful. Still, after myself having read it so many times, it still gets me. And it's amazing how it's all so still so true, even though you wrote that a few years back. Our next reader is Suzanne Clores. Suzanne is, well, she'll tell you that she's also from Chicagoland. And Suzanne is the author of Memoirs of a Spiritual Outsider. And she's also the creator of a wonderful podcast called The Extraordinary Project. She lives in Evanston. And Suzanne, so nice to also finally meet you, sort of. And I wanted to ask you if you had a chance to watch the vice presidential debate earlier this week.
So no, because I knew the rage and anxiety that it would instill within me, and I had a lot of deadlines this week, and so I just did some self-care and did not watch, but I did see, some excerpts.
Right. So I'm sure you heard about the fact that Pence was talking over Kamala a lot, and it reminded me of your essay. And so, I'll just leave it at that. Why don't you go ahead?
Oh, sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this reading. And I'm a big fan of Women and Children First. And it's honored to be part of this anthology and to be in such good company, especially at this time that is incredibly fraught. I wrote this essay the day after the election in 2016. I remember it so clearly. The day after, I was stunned. And in fact, the last 4 years have been so much worse than I anticipated. And having grown up the 80s sort of in New Jersey watching Donald Trump on Page 6 and just sort of showboating around Manhattan, I knew, kind of like what you said earlier in your introduction, Amy, but I did not know the degree to which our country was so deeply fractured. I naively thought we were actually on our way to healing after 8 years of Obama. But that election was a very necessary and abrupt wake-up call that it isn't only the large systemic problems in our culture, but the tiny microaggressions that women and girls deal with every day from a very young age matter and must be reckoned with. So that was the place that I began when I wrote this essay as a parent to a 4th grade girl. And Cassandra's reading so salient to me for this reason. I think we were both in a similar but different place with our children. And this ran in Elle.com. Did she win, Mama? No, honey. A single tear rolled down my daughter's cheek. She was still in bed, facing the tree out her window, which was almost empty of flaming orange leaves. You mean that rude man is our president? I probably should have let her get out of bed first, let her dress, sit at the table with a bowl of cornflakes, pick at her blueberries judiciously. Let her feel power over at least her breakfast. If you're a fourth grade girl with a class ratio of 14-4, that is 14 boys to 4 girls, the way to hear bad news about the first female presidential candidate losing to a loud, rude man is not lying down, snuggled in bed, vulnerable. Especially when she has a daily fight on her hands, a micro world in which she is constantly talked over, shoved aside, and outnumbered by voluminous, space-claiming, jubilant boys. In other words, she goes into a classroom very much like the world women endure every day. I wiped her tear as my husband came in, wringing his hands, exhausted from being up all night. It's just an election, and yet the task of telling our daughter that her country elected a bully who makes fun of the disabled instead of a woman who worked hard serving other people most of her life is infuriating and deeply nauseating. We tell her instead that although she lost the presidency, Hillary won the state of Illinois, where we live, and many other states. We tell her Hillary won the popular vote. Within a few minutes, she is up and looking for matching socks. I'm relieved, but struggling for next steps. I've been actively using this election as a tool to prove that things can change, that the gender-typical hazing of rambunctious boys will not be the norm forever, that as she grows, it will go away. The election of the first female president would have been a truthful illustration of this claim. Now I have to find another example or admit that in some ways it isn't really true. The nearly 4-to-1 ratio in her class is just dumb luck, but its consequences are anything but innocuous. 4 voices are fewer and quieter than 14 voices. 4 bodies are literally less noticeable than 14 bodies. I and many women are very familiar with the consequences of this mathematical deficit. Any woman who works in a lopsided corporate environment knows this dynamic, how it puts the focus on you at the same time that it takes away your power. You are scrutinized more, rewarded less. She is only 9, and yet I wonder if the exhaustion she sometimes feels upon coming home from school reflects this added labor, the labor of making herself heard. By most accounts, the children get along in groups, perform the musical and theatrical productions in harmony. But I remind myself that alongside this harmony, my girl is forced to advocate for herself constantly, in gym class, on the playground, and in group discussions every day. I remind myself she has run for student council since 2nd grade, and every time has lost. Nevertheless, she painstakingly makes signs to post around the school, listing her qualifications for her candidacy every year. Teachers encourage all children who want to serve their school to participate, not acknowledging the gender imbalance. And when she loses, I've had to explain for 3 years now that she's not losing because she's not qualified. But none of the girls ever win, she says. Keep trying, I say in a supportive, upbeat refrain, because I do want her to keep trying. What I don't want is for her to know exactly the nature of who and what has won. We did not tell of the president-elect's threats to minorities, assaults against women, and bigoted leanings. Nor have we told her that Hillary barely winning the popular vote meant that many Americans voted for a dangerous man rather than a flawed woman. We hid well what to me epitomizes the waking nightmare of a parent, that your child, upon realizing her parents can't control the outside world, worries she is not actually safe. But we could not and cannot keep everything from her. After watching the second debate, she noticed that Hillary's opponent behaved like kids in her class. He keeps interrupting her, she claimed. I can't hear what she's saying. I'm preparing my daughter for the inevitability that she'll be called shrill and bossy, even as she's already internalizing the consequences of that kind of dismissal. I don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings, she said, when I ask why she doesn't tell other kids to share the basketball court or stop kicking her seat. This translates to, I don't want to be punished for speaking out. I tell her I understand, but that speaking out is how others learn to respect you. I'm hoping this lost election will change her sense of possibility, shift her focus to the value of speaking up and trying. The fact that she spent Friday nights in October at the Hillary for President campaign office, making buttons one at a time, her small hands on a giant steel contraption for volunteers to take to Iowa canvassing the next day, made an impact on her heart, if not on the rest of the country. She put her hard work into something she wanted and found out firsthand what it's like to believe in something, to put your faith behind a cause. When I picked her up from school on Wednesday, she skipped into the car, almost completely recovered from the news that I and much of the country were still struggling with. This year I was elected alternate on the student council, she said as she munched her pretzels. That means 2 boys voted for me. Change, though slow, is on the horizon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between your story and your essay and Cassandra's. We're gonna move over to Sarah Einstein now. And Sarah, I have a true confession. When I first read your essay, when we were going through the selection process, first of all, I loved it, but I thought it was over the top. I was like,
everybody said that.
Yeah, I'm like, God, like I thought I was like really kind of out there in terms of my my thoughts about what this meant for the country, but I don't know, and now you are prescient. You're an oracle, unfortunately.
I feel like, so I am a queer Jewish Appalachian woman with a disability. And I feel like that meant that there was all sorts of stuff that I'd already seen happen, right? I remember when queer community had to totally reshape itself during the AIDS crisis, the last time our government was happily killing us all. And it just felt to me like that's what was coming. And I wanted to write an essay that talked about how we build networks of compensatory care. This is an essay in segments, and there's a segment in this essay that's the whole reason I wrote the essay in the first place. I wrote it originally for a faculty reading, and it's a segment in which I say something directly to my students about the fact that I have Plan B in my office and a shadowy network of old ladies who will help them get reproductive health care if they need it. And the genesis of this essay is really that you can't put that on your office door. Was that I got to stand up in front of a room full of a couple hundred of our students and say that, because I feel like it's a time where we have to stand up and say what sort of care we're willing and able to offer to each other to get through this time.
So you want to forge ahead?
Sure. All right. And I'm going to jump around and just read a few of the sections because I know we're running a little long. Going to ground. Like a good citizen, I call my senators at least once a week, but their aides are brusque. They tell me that Alexander and Corker support the president's education agenda, healthcare reform, immigration order, or whatever I'm outraged about on a given day. In the first few weeks, they thank me for my call. Now they simply say, your objection is noted, and hang up as quickly as they can. Once, as if caught off guard, one said, are you sure you live in Tennessee? I carry my passport with me everywhere these days. When I travel, I wear an inherited diamond I feel silly wearing at home. I remember being told when I was younger that a Jewish woman should always have enough jewelry on her body to bribe her way over a border. At the time, it seemed quaint. Now it seems key. For the moment, the diamond ring's still on my finger. I wonder if there will come a day when I'll need to sew it into the lining of my coat. Over coffee, my friend Meredith talks about joining the resistance in a way that suggests we're headed for a war that she thinks we can win. I talk about going to ground, about building false walls to hide people waiting for fake passports and safe transport. We scare ourselves and then laugh at ourselves, but after laughing, we're still scared. Meredith wasn't always Meredith, and there is a passel of bills in our state legislature designed to make it impossible for her to be Meredith now. I tell her I will shelter her in my hidden rooms if it comes to that. She says she won't be hidden, but she might move to Atlanta. If we flee, we will go to my husband's family in Austria. They assure us that we'll be safe there, should it come to that, and I believe them. They've clearly learned lessons that we have not. The irony of this is not lost on me. There are Nazis in the family album. My closest disabled friends and I swap lists of medications and start to hoard the things one or some of us may need against the day we lose access to them. We read up on actual expiration dates versus labeled expiration dates. We refill prescriptions before we need to, just in case. I have 6 boxes of Plan B in my closet, even though I'm long past childbearing years. On campus, I spread rumors about a shadowy network of old women who will help younger women with travel and money for abortions if they can't get the health care they need here. I call all my old women friends and build that network. I keep their names and numbers in handwritten lists and hide them away. And yet still, like a good citizen, I call my senators at least once a week. Their aides are brusque. In the first few weeks, they thank me for my call. Now they hang up as quickly as they can. I haven't given up on the dream of America, but I'm making contingency plans. Thank you, and thank you for including me in this, and thank you to Women and Children First, which is, I miss when there were feminist bookstores everywhere, and I'm really grateful to Women and Children First for still being part of that landscape.
Wow. I forgot to mention that in addition to my being, I don't know, I also got chills, and I just got them again. Sarah, and you're a modern day Harriet Tubman. God bless you. Thank you so much. It's, I'm sorry that any of those thoughts and all of your actions are even necessary, but thank you. All right, so our final presenter tonight is Dina Elenbogen. She's the author of the memoir Drawn from Water. She's an American poet, and okay, I'm sorry, the title of the memoir is Drawn from Water, an American poet. She's also an American poet, an American poet, an Ethiopian family, an Israeli story. She's also written a poetry collection entitled Apples of the Earth. Her essay in Fury is part of a newly completed essay collection, which I didn't know about. Congratulations, Dina, called Eating and Drinking with Sages. And Dina, my question for you real quick is, you started your essay talking about Moshe the beetle, which for those who don't know, was a prophet who saw a fire in the distance that nobody else could see. So that sort of echoes what I was saying about we knew. Also, Cassandra echoes your essay as well. And I was just curious, like, did you know all along you were going to start out talking about Moshe the beetle when you wrote this essay?
You know, I didn't know that, but that was really my return trip to Bloomington, Indiana, where I had been on election day, sort of brought on this essay, because sitting in my professor's office and thinking about the literature that we used to read, and somehow I got stuck on that image because, you know, as the days went on, in some ways I began to feel like Moshe the beetle in some circles, when I was constantly like, how can this happen? How can we let this happen? You know, this has to be turned around. People are saying it is what it is. You know, this is the way things are going to be. We have to move on. So I started relating to that character who was in Elie Wiesel's memoir Night. And in some ways that really sparked the essay, that return trip, and thinking about, you know, what had happened over that month, and thinking about that time period during World War II and the Holocaust.
Yeah. Well, go for it.
Okay. So I'm going to read a few excerpts from the beginning and the end of this. It's a rather long essay, so I'm going to read some short excerpts. The Fire in the Distance. On the last day of the old world, I sit in a chair talking to my erstwhile professor in his office, where I once spent many hours as a young poet. He'd introduced our class to Moshe the Beetle, the madman prophet who saw the fire in the distance and cried out even if no one listened, in Elie Wiesel's Holocaust memoir, Night. He introduced us to Primo Levi, who wrote, "In Auschwitz, not only man died, but the idea of man." Together, we read Emanuel Ringelblum's Warsaw Diary, which documented the cruelty he witnessed in the ghetto in Poland. Those writers and prophets described a barbarism beyond anything we'd ever known. We vowed to keep their memories alive, to never forget. My professor listened to and honored my poems, my melancholy, and my search for truth. Each week, I'd bring a new poem to his office, and he would listen to it, change what got in the way of my own music. He heard my timid voice grow louder through the years. He preferred whispers to screams. On the last day of the old world, my daughter turns 19 at the same university, which is why I returned to the chair in the corner of my professor's office. My daughter arrived at the school with a rich, soulful voice that brought her to the sacred music program. My husband, 15-year-old son, and I are in Bloomington on election day so we can canvass for voters in a non-swing state of endearment, be with our daughter on her birthday, and cheer on the election of the first woman president together. Or so we believe as we stroll down a street of hope, one I'd never been down before, near East 2nd, surrounded by other more run-down streets. On this newly developed avenue, each house is a different bright purple or green, with sprawling porches, holding tricycles, piles of collected stones, summer shoes still drying out, solar heating, and signs everywhere that say Fire Pence, Clinton Kane, 2016. The trees still carry the deepest reds of autumn. When we ring the final bell and a light rain begins to cover our materials, we return to the Democratic headquarters, hand back unused flyers, and look at the returns on TV and the newly concerned faces of the workers there. How do things look? I ask anxiously, having been away from media all day and not sensing a jubilant mood. Too early to tell, not enough votes counted to really tell anything yet, a worker responds. He thanks us for our day of walking through the blue streets of a red state. I return to Ballantine Hall, where I spent my formative years, camped out in the hallway, waiting for my professor, on the campus where the falling leaves of my first year there brought me to poems I'd written with abandonment, love, innocence, and a sense that anything was possible, a place where I felt there was a huge poem living in me. I wanted to learn how to release it. In our literature classes, the truth of our existence could be found in the books we shared. My professor never spoke of his own life, but of worlds where men weren't free, where anti-Semitism and finally death camps defined the life of a Jew. Some of the words that began to enter our conversations were resistance, uprising, the Third Reich. 3 decades later, the hallway seems so narrow I can barely pass those sitting and waiting. I lean into my professor's same office with the hesitancy of a 19-year-old until he looks up with shock and welcome. He invites me to sit down in the chair in the corner. I'm not here to discuss my poems or to ask why no one believed Moshe the Beetle when he spoke of the horrors he had witnessed in the death camps. I'm here to offer my condolences. My professor's wife died suddenly and unexpectedly on an ordinary September afternoon. I sit quietly and absorb his emotion the way I once absorbed his words. He tries to bring me back and release me from his cloud of sadness by asking after my life, my writing. Aware of the student in the hallway, I prepare to leave as we share our concern about the election results. Even the slightest possibility of a Trump victory brings us to despair. Out the window, the day darkens until late afternoon. My daughter meets me, and we wait near a stairwell in Ballantine for my husband and son, as a blonde, chunky student in a red Trump shirt and hat passes us with what I see as a glaring look. I clear my throat and my daughter sternly whispers, "Don't say anything." On that day, November, election day, my daughter's 19th birthday, this Trump supporter in a college town in Indiana is still a shock. The sight of him and the aggressive sound of his boots hiking up steps send a shiver through my body. At this moment, I still think he is an aberration, not a foreshadowing. And then skipping a little bit. On the way home, I drive and my husband navigates through rain and fog and the radio, which calls election results. States we never expected to turn red were turning red. I asked my husband to turn off the radio because the sound is distorted and distracting, and this can't be true. Too many votes haven't been counted. This can't be true. As we get closer to Chicago, my phone buzzes with texts from my Evanston friends who are on their way back from Ohio, where they had helped with voter protection. Their messages say things like, "Are you as sick as I am?" and "I'm going to throw up." My husband, son, and I are also concerned, but we think the election is still inconclusive. This doesn't seem right, can't be right. A day or so later, we understand that on a dark road in Indiana, we saw the beginning of the country changing. And then the last paragraph, which takes place a month later on a return trip to Bloomington. In the morning, I bundle up against 19-degree winds and jog along the Jordan River that runs through campus, where decades ago my early poems fell into my lap as leaves untangled from my hair. A student whose face is covered in a winter mask runs toward me, and I panic before realizing he is just late to class. I don't visit my professor because suddenly it feels too painful. I still want to know I know and listen to most of the detail. I want to shout in my poems and conversations. My professor prefers whispers. I run faster and faster against these snowy paths, searching for an image that will help me describe where I am today, 1 month after the world has begun to change. All I can find is my 3-word refrain, "This can't be." Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. Well, some of this is hard to listen to because we're still going through it, but I wanted to just say that it looks like, I remember when people were starting to say resistance, I said I was part of the resistance, but I was also kind of afraid, like what, if I call myself part of the resistance, what might happen? But it looks like we've done a fabulous job at least turning, based on recent polls, turning a lot of women around and getting them to see what we saw in the distance there back in 2016, 2015. Questions, please. Let's see, I think I can open questions, but okay, yeah, I don't see that we have any questions. So we have a few minutes left. I know we got a little bit of a late start, but I would love to answer if anybody has a question. You could put it in the chat section or click on ask a question, either way. Come on, test us. No? Any of our presenters have a question for me or one of the other presenters?
Well, I wanted to just thank everybody since I didn't have a chance to do that when I started. Women and Children First, Sarah, Amy, and all of the contributors, all of your words resonated with me so much. So, and I've, had the privilege of reading a lot of these essays before, but hearing you all read them was just so powerful as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dina. We did get one question here. We have a couple now. First question, can you compare how you feel now in 2020 versus how you were feeling in 2016? I can talk to that, but I've done plenty of talking. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that?
I wonder if we should let everybody else back in, the other panelists, so they can.
I don't know how to do that. Sarah, if you're there, could you let?
Yeah, it looks like she's going to do it.
Yeah, great. Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We're all figuring this out as we go along. By the way, just my shirt, to all of you in the audience, the Badass Women in Me honors the Badass Women in all of you. And also, we were gonna, when we were planning on doing the book tour live, we were gonna have voter registration tables set up at each event, but we weren't able to do that, obviously. But please, everybody, go out and vote. Okay, somebody want to address the question about how they feel now versus 2016?
I could say just very briefly, I feel a lot worse than I did then. There was still a sense of hope, walking the streets of Bloomington and thinking, okay, this is just sort of an exercise. Everybody had their cocktails ready to celebrate Clinton's, win. And we knew it was going to be bad, but we didn't know how bad. And I feel like it's worse. It's beyond, my wildest nightmares. And, and I was thinking about just the price of him winning again. It was just too devastating to even contemplate. So I feel like on November 3rd, I'm going to be a lot more nervous than I was on November 8th, 2016. There's a lot more at stake.
I want to say I feel better, which I think is surprising to people, but I live in a very red part of outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And on my morning walk, there are more Biden signs than Trump signs, which is new. It's just the last couple of days. People have stopped me. We put ours up yesterday, and people have stopped me to say, thank you. And now I feel safe to put mine up. And I think we're going to win. I know that's a scary, bad thing to say, but I think we're going to win. And I think we're going to win in a way that really is going to mean there's going to be public will to address things like gerrymandering and voter suppression. God help us if we lose, but I'm a lot more hopeful that we're going to win now than I was a year ago.
Wow. Good.
Yeah, I would say, there's different reasons for cocktails these days than there were on election night in 2016. But I also feel cautiously hopeful. You don't want to have the, first time bad on me, second time, or bad on you, second time bad on me. I don't want to go through what I went through on election eve 2016. And I think we're in for a different set of circumstances this time. I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be more drawn out, and I think we'll prevail, though. I'm very hopeful. One person was asking if I had any plans for a follow-up after this election, and that's interesting. I do have Heroics coming out, which is a collection about the pandemic, but I was thinking just this evening as I was getting ready to come on that there's a book that I was a co-editor for a couple of years ago that was called Ritual and Healing. Extraordinary and Ordinary Stories of Transformation. And what I'd like to do is take all the female authors from that book and gather some more and add to it. It was published by a Vanity Press, and it's expired now, so we can republish it. I would love to do a book about healing, because I think that we're entering, hopefully, into a period where a lot of healing is going to be needed, both from exhaustion and also just healing in terms of our relationships that have taken some pretty powerful hits over the last several years. We also have another question. I noticed no men are with us. Is that typical for the tour? Unfortunately, yes, it is. There's been a handful of men that have joined the readings, but just a handful, as I'd say, been 90% women. And I think there's a lot in here for men. I likened it to, if you're a man, you should read this because maybe you'll know that you have toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe. It's reading this will help you see how women see things. I won't say men, but just how we see things differently. And that's always good, even if we're your enemy, know thy enemy, right? So no, I think it's always good to know how others see things. It helps us to see ourselves more completely. And then I guess we can do one more question since we started a little bit late. let's see. So, Dina, this one's for you. Was writing this out therapy for you? And how are you feeling getting out? And getting out? Anyway, I was writing this anybody could answer this really, was I think all of us may have experienced writing our essays as a cathartic experience. Anybody, Dina, go ahead and answer that, and anybody else that would like to.
It was, and I wrote this short piece for brevity about the process of writing this essay. And for a long time, I had November 8th in my notebook, blank. I literally wrote down the words November 8th and then didn't write anything again for about 12 days. And then returning to Bloomington a month later, I was staying in a bed and breakfast, helping my daughter move, which is a whole story in itself. But this just came pouring out. I went to visit my professor, and that month before in Canvas, and just the whole story just came pouring out, and it was cathartic. Just all the fear. I didn't even want to drive alone to Bloomington, which I've done many times. Suddenly I felt vulnerable in a way that I hadn't a month before, and ended up my 94-year-old father drove along with me. And so it was a really scary time. In writing, it was very helpful for me because it was also chaotic. So even though I put something on paper, turn the chaos into something more cohesive. So it was very useful that way, just to create something out of it.
Yeah, I would add just that there were a lot of essays about hope in the book. Some of the essays tonight were a little bit on the heavy side, but several of the essays spoke to just a resilience and a hope for the future, not a Pollyannish hope, but a more we've overcome a lot, be it in our lives or in our country, we can overcome this too. And I think for a lot of us, myself included, that felt right at the time to think about how we're going to get through this. Anybody else want to weigh in, and then we'll let everybody go have their dinner, or depending on what part of the country you're in.
Right. I think in writing to my son, encouraging him, to speak up, I was also writing to myself and pushing myself, like feeling such deep cynicism and knowing that I had to fight that cynicism. So I think after the election, I definitely got super serious and felt very urgent to finish a long time book project that I had been working on and off. And that finally got finished last year and will be published next year. And I think the election and then writing that essay right after, I needed to do something, and that pushed me to use my own power of voice, as I was encouraging my son to do.
Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you also, Women and Children First. It's just been truly an honor to be presenting for your iconic bookstore.
Well, thank all of you. I so enjoyed this reading. It is such a perfect time to hear all of your voices and settle into that power. So thank you for spending your Friday night with us. If you haven't ordered the book, it's here. It's available. And if you know anyone who couldn't join us tonight, don't worry. This event was recorded, and it will be posted on Women and Children First YouTube channel tomorrow. So thank you all so much, and have a beautiful night. And I hope you will all go out and vote, and take to the streets if you have a march to the polls near you. Yes. Any last words?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.